10 long years, he stood alone like a silent guardian on Whispering Pines Road. Through heat waves that made the horizon dance, through snow that buried his legs, and rainstorms that turned the earth to rivers of mud, he waited. Monarch the majestic Mustang became more than just a horse. He became a legend in Golden Prairie, a living mystery no one could quite explain. Cars would slow down when they saw him. Locals left out hay and buckets of water. But no one could touch him. He wasn't lost. He wasn't trapped. He was waiting for something or someone. Then one evening, just as the sun painted the sky with streaks of amber and gold, something happened that no one expected. Something that changed everything. And once you hear what unfolded after a decade of silent hope, you'll never look at animals the same way again. Because this isn't just a story about a horse. It's about devotion that defies reason, about a connection so deep it outlasted time, distance, and heartbreak. The truth behind Monarch's unwavering vigil will move you to tears. And what followed? It might just restore your faith in what ties us to the animals we love. Quick pause, drop a comment, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly something else. That morning, the highway lay quiet, bathed in soft golden light. Mist clung to the tall grass, and shadows stretched long across the road. And there he was, like always. A chestnut Mustang with a bold white star on his forehead, standing near an old fence post like it was sacred ground. His coat shimmered in the dawn, his mane slightly wild, eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't react to cars, didn't care for people passing by, he just waited. For 10 years, Monarch never left. Nobody knew where he came from. Truckers, commuters, and the few remaining locals of Golden Prairie noticed him, but no one had the heart to drive him away. Some offered food. He'd eat, but only after they were gone. If you got too close, he'd calmly step back, never fearful, never hostile, just distant, just waiting. Ruth Morgan, 76, silver hair always tied in a bun, was one of the first to care. Every morning before opening her small general store, she'd leave hay by the fence. "Poor thing," she'd say. "He's waiting for someone. I don't know who, but I hope they come." He made it through freezing winters, blazing summers, and violent storms. His shelter? A single oak tree nearby. But he never strayed far. Some nights the town would fall quiet and you could hear it, that soft, mournful whinny drifting on the wind. It was the kind of sound that reached into your chest and stayed there. Animal control came once, tried to intervene, but Sheriff Howard Wilson stepped in. "He's not hurting anyone," he said, arms crossed, voice firm. "He belongs to this town now. Let him be." And they did. They gave him space. They gave him food and water. But above all, they gave him respect. Then came that clear autumn morning. Brian Walsh, 34, hair tousled by the wind, sharp eyes behind a camera lens, was driving through Golden Prairie, just like he had many times before. A wildlife photographer, always chasing his next story. But this time, something about Monarch made him stop. Maybe it was the stillness, the dignity in the way the horse held himself. Brian pulled over, grabbed his telephoto lens, and snapped a few shots. Then curiosity took over. 20 minutes later, Brian walked into Ruth's general store. The bell above the door jingled softly. The scent of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. "Morning," Ruth said, looking up from behind the counter. "Coffee, please," Brian replied, sliding onto a stool. "And can you tell me about the horse? The one by Whispering Pines?" Her face lit up. "You mean Monarch? That's his name?" "That's what we call him," Ruth said, pouring coffee into a mug. "Don't know if that was always his name." "How long's he been there?" She paused, then sighed. 10 years. Can you believe it? 10 years, same exact spot. Brian blinked. 10 years? That's incredible. "Well," she smiled, "he's still there, isn't he?" From a corner booth, Sheriff Wilson looked up from his breakfast and joined in. "You a reporter or something?" Brian shook his head. "Wildlife photographer. I'm working on a series about wild horses in the West. He handed over his card. Brian Walsh, wildlife photography. The sheriff studied it and said, "Well, mister, Walsh, that horse isn't exactly wild. Not in the way you think." "Wild?" Brian echoed. "He's something else." The sheriff exchanged a quiet glance with Ruth before answering. "That horse knows exactly where he is," he said. "Doesn't wander, doesn't join the wild herds that sometimes come through. Just stands there, same place every single day, watching that road like he's waiting for someone." Brian leaned in. "Has anyone ever tried to catch him?" Ruth jumped in before the sheriff could reply. "Oh, plenty have tried. Animal control, a couple of ranchers, even that rescue group from Cedar Falls, but he won't let anyone near, won't take a halter. It's like he's waiting on his terms." "But he's not dangerous," the sheriff added. "Never aggressive, just determined." Brian's instincts were kicking in now. This wasn't just a local oddity. This was a story, a real one. So no one knows where he came from, or who he might be waiting for? Ruth gave a tired smile as she wiped her hands on her apron. People have guesses. Some think he belonged to a family that used to own a ranch out there. Others say he must have fallen off a trailer during a move, but no one knows for sure. He showed up during the summer of 2014 and never left. Brian couldn't shake it. A horse standing vigil for a decade. It didn't just defy logic, it demanded attention. He returned to Monarch's post, parked a respectful distance away, and set up his tripod. Through his camera lens, he studied the Mustang. The intelligent eyes that scanned every passing car. The way he held his head high, his ears flicking, always alert. There was something more behind that stare, something that felt human. "What are you waiting for?" Brian whispered under his breath. As if responding, Monarch turned his head slightly, meeting Brian's eyes for a split second. And in that moment, Brian felt it. A chill down his spine. There was something in that gaze, something more than instinct. Purpose, memory, loss. Brian stayed the entire day, documenting everything. Monarch grazing, drinking from the nearby creek, returning to his post like clockwork. It wasn't aimless, it was ritual. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Monarch's silhouette against the orange and purple sky, Brian packed up his gear, but he didn't leave. He sat on the tailgate of his truck and watched until the stars came out, until the world around them fell into stillness. Only then did he return to his motel. That night, back in his room, Brian sifted through the photos. One in particular stopped him cold. Monarch, standing tall, eyes locked on the lens. The fading sun caught just right in his pupils, making them glow with an almost ethereal light. Something about that image stirred something deep in Brian. He couldn't let it go. He opened his laptop and started searching. Local archives, missing horse reports, social media posts, anything. He dove deep into old databases, determined to find the beginning of this story. And just after 2 a.m., when he was about to give up, he found it. A tiny article from the Golden Prairie Gazette, dated July 2014. It read, "Local family loses ranch. The Reynolds family has sold their Sunset Ridge property following financial hardship. Stephen and Carolyn Reynolds, along with their children Ella and Noah, have relocated out of state. The Reynolds were known for breeding quarter horses and had also rescued a Mustang from the Thunder Basin herd several years ago." Brian sat up, wide awake now. Could that Mustang be Monarch? The next morning, coffee in hand, Brian walked back into Ruth's general store, phone in hand. "The Reynolds family," he said, showing her the article. "Do you remember them?" Her face changed instantly. "Of course. Lovely people. It broke the town's heart when they had to leave. They were struggling after the drought and just couldn't keep the ranch going." "They had a Mustang," Brian said gently. "Think that could be Monarch?" Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "Oh my goodness. Stephen did rescue a Mustang years ago. Beautiful animal. White star right on his forehead, just like Monarch. But didn't they sell their horses when they left?" "They tried to." Ruth nodded slowly. "Carolyn told me they found homes for all of them. But she said her daughter Ella was devastated to leave that Mustang. Said he was special. Brian could feel it now, the story falling into place. Do you know where they moved? Ruth shook her head. Somewhere east, I think. They didn't stay in touch with many people here. It was too hard, too many memories. Brian's next stop was the county records office. He spent hours poring over property records until he found it. The 2014 foreclosure of Sunset Ridge Ranch. All confirmed. Sold to a development company. But no forwarding address. No clue where the Reynolds family had gone. Just a horse. Still waiting. That afternoon, Brian drove out to what used to be the Sunset Ridge Ranch, but the rolling fields and old fences were gone, replaced by rows of identical modern homes. The only trace of the past was a single weathered barn, kept intact by the developers as a rustic design feature. Brian stood there, photographing the last remnants of history, when an elderly man wandered over from a nearby porch. "You interested in the old Reynolds place?" the man asked, squinting into the sun. Brian nodded. "Yeah, trying to learn about a Mustang. I think he might have belonged to them." The old man's eyes lit up. "Ah, you must be talking about Monarch. That was Stephen Reynolds' pride and joy. Found him out in Thunder Basin, hurt real bad. Nursed him back to life. That horse followed their little girl Ella everywhere, like a loyal pup. Never seen a bond like it." Brian leaned in. "Do you know what happened to him when they left town?" The man scratched his chin. "Well, Stephen had lined up good homes for all the horses. Monarch was supposed to go to a family in Cedar Falls, but the story I heard, he escaped. Next morning, after they took him, jumped a fence no horse should have been able to clear. They searched for weeks," the man said, shaking his head. "But he was gone." He pointed down the road. "If the horse you've been watching is Monarch, well, it makes sense now." Brian tilted his head. "How so?" "That road, Whispering Pines. That's the last place the Reynolds family drove out of town. Last place Monarch would have seen them." Brian froze. His whole body went cold. Could it really be that simple? And that heartbreaking? Had Monarch spent 10 years at the exact spot where he last saw his family? Waiting, hoping, believing they'd come back? The drive back to Monarch's post felt different now. Heavy, sacred. This wasn't just a story about unusual animal behavior. This was a living testament to love, to memory, to loyalty that defied logic. The sun was setting when Brian pulled up. Monarch was there, as always, a silhouette against the golden sky. But now, Brian didn't just see a Mustang. He saw a guardian, a soul waiting patiently for the only people who had ever mattered to him. "They didn't abandon you," Brian whispered, knowing Monarch couldn't hear him. "They thought you were safe." And in that moment, Brian made a decision. He was going to find the Reynolds family, one way or another. They had to know. The horse that never forgot them was still here, still waiting. What Brian didn't realize was that his search was about to lead to something no one in Golden Prairie could have predicted. A moment so powerful, it would leave the whole town in tears. Telling this story took time and heart, so if you're feeling it, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It really helps us keep stories like this coming. Now back to it. Brian's motel room had become a mission control center. Papers were scattered across the desk. His laptop displayed a web of searches. Photos of Monarch, dozens of them, lined the wall like clues in a mystery. 3 days had passed since he made the connection between Monarch and the Reynolds family. 3 days of dead ends. He rubbed his eyes. The clock glowed. 2:37 a.m. Another sleepless night chasing whispers. The Reynolds family had vanished. No social media, no recent public records. It was like they had cut ties with their past completely. Then, a soft knock at the door. Brian frowned. At this hour, he opened it to find Joey Hudson, the teenage son of the motel owner, holding a paper bag. "Mom thought you might be hungry," Joey said, handing it over. "Says you haven't left your room except to visit that horse." Brian smiled gratefully. "Your mom's a hero. Thank her for me." Joey turned to leave but paused. You know, I remember the Reynolds. Brian perked up. You do? Not well, Joey said, leaning against the doorframe. Ella was a couple grades ahead of me, but her best friend was my cousin Rachel. They kept in touch even after the family moved. Brian sat up. Do you think Rachel might know where they went? Maybe. She's away at college, but she's coming back this weekend for her mom's birthday. Brian's heart thudded. Joey, could you introduce us when she gets here? Sure, Joey nodded, then hesitated. But what's this all about? People are talking. You watching that horse every day? Brian took a deep breath. I believe Monarch is the Reynolds Mustang, and I believe he's been waiting for them all these years. Joey stared. Seriously? That's insane. And sad, Brian added softly, which is why I need to find them. After Joey left, sleep didn't come. All Brian could picture was Monarch, alone, through summer heat, winter storms, standing by that road with hope in his heart. At dawn, Brian returned to Whispering Pines. And there he was, Monarch, bronze in the early morning light, head turned to the horizon like always. Brian parked farther away than usual, careful not to disturb him. He set up his camera like every day, documenting each detail, building the story, honoring the wait. Late morning, a familiar truck pulled up. Walter Donovan, the current owner of the land near the road. He walked over, hand extended. Mr. Walsh, Ruth said you'd be out here. Said you were trying to help Monarch. Brian shook his hand. I'm trying, but it's complicated. Walter nodded, his gaze drifting toward the oak tree. Been watching that horse for years, he said quietly. My property starts just beyond that tree line. Never had the heart to run him off. Brian turned to him. Do you know anything about the Reynolds family? Anything at all that might help me find them? Walter took off his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. Didn't know them well, but Stephen, he was proud. The kind of man who wouldn't ask for help, even when he needed it. He sighed. But their daughter, she was something special. Had a way with animals I've never seen. Ella, Brian said. That's her. Walter smiled faintly. That horse followed her everywhere. I remember seeing them. She'd talk to him like he was human. And I swear he understood. He looked toward Monarch, who stood motionless near the fence. When I heard they were selling off their horses, I offered to take him. Thought it might help the girl let go, but Stephen wouldn't hear it. Said Monarch was family, that he needed to go somewhere special. Do you know where that was supposed to be? Brian asked. Some ranch in Cedar Falls, Walter replied. Part of a breeding program for Mustangs. But then I heard he escaped. Jumped a fence too high for any horse to clear. He turned to Brian. You really think you can find them after all this time? Brian nodded, eyes locked on Monarch. I have to try, for him. Later that afternoon, Dr. Isabel Martinez arrived, Monarch's longtime vet. She'd been checking on him every few months for years. She moved carefully, never getting too close, using binoculars to observe him from a distance. His condition is remarkable, she told Brian. Considering he's lived outdoors for a decade, he's in excellent shape. The community's done right by him. Do you think he remembers them? Brian asked. The Reynolds? Dr. Martinez lowered her binoculars, her expression thoughtful. Horses have an incredible long-term memory, especially when it comes to people and places tied to strong emotional experiences. If the bond was real, yes, he remembers. Enough to wait 10 years? She gave a soft, sad smile. Science might say no, but, she motioned toward Monarch, he says otherwise. That evening, Brian was reviewing footage when his phone rang. It was Joey. She's here, the teen said. Rachel's here, and she wants to talk to you. 20 minutes later, Brian was sitting across from Rachel Barker, Ella's childhood best friend. Now a college sophomore, she had curious eyes and a cautious smile. So Joey told me everything, she said, stirring her coffee. About Monarch, about him waiting all this time. It sounds impossible, but also kinda like him. It is true, Brian said. I've confirmed that Monarch was their horse. What I haven't figured out is where the Reynolds are now, or how to reach them. Rachel bit her lip, thinking. Ella and I emailed for about a year after she moved. We were best friends. I don't have her number anymore, but I remember they moved to Boulder Ridge. Her dad got a construction job out there. Brian's heart skipped. Where's Boulder Ridge? Michigan, Rachel said. About 40 miles north of Detroit. Ella hated it. Said it was nothing like home. Did she ever mention Monarch? All the time, Rachel said, her voice softening. They'd had him since she was little. Her dad found him injured in Thunder Basin. She nursed him back to life. Brian leaned forward. What kind of bond did they have? The kind you don't see twice, Rachel said with a gentle laugh. He'd come when she called, kneel down so she could climb onto his back, followed her everywhere like a dog. She cried for weeks when they left. Said goodbye was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Do you have any photos? Brian asked. Anything that shows them together? Rachel nodded and pulled out her phone. After a moment of scrolling, she handed it to him. The image hit Brian like a wave. 2 little girls, around 8 years old, sitting on a fence, and beside them, Monarch, younger but unmistakable, resting his head against a blonde girl's shoulder. Ella, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried in his mane. May I? Brian asked, lifting his own phone. Rachel nodded. She used to sit with him for hours, she said. Whenever things got rough at home, money troubles, her parents arguing, she'd disappear into the stable. Monarch was the only one who really understood her. Brian swallowed the lump in his throat. Thank you, Rachel. This helps more than you know. If you find her, Rachel said as he stood, tell her I miss her. And tell her Monarch never forgot. That night, with a real lead finally in hand, Brian poured himself into the search. Boulder Ridge, Michigan, a construction job. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He scoured contractor directories, social media groups, local news archives. Then, just past midnight, he found it. A 3-year-old article from a local Michigan newspaper, Reynolds Construction completes new community center. There was a quote from the project manager, Stephen Reynolds. The article even mentioned his transition from Wyoming ranching to Michigan construction. Brian's heart pounded. Got you, he whispered. He kept digging. Within the hour, he had a phone number, an address. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the call button. What would he even say? What if they didn't believe him? What if... How do you tell a family that the horse they were forced to leave behind has spent an entire decade waiting? Brian took a steady breath and hit call. It rang 4 times. Then, "This is Stephen Reynolds. Leave a message." The voice was brief, rough, matching the man Walter had described. Brian cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, my name is Brian Walsh. I'm a wildlife photographer currently in Golden Prairie, Wyoming. I'm calling about Monarch." He paused. "Your horse. He's here, Mr. Reynolds. He's been here for 10 years, waiting at Whispering Pines Road. Please call me back. It's important." He ended the call, heart pounding. Should he have said more? Less? Would Stephen even remember a horse from a decade ago? Would he even care? Brian stepped outside, needing air. The night sky above was sharp and clear, stars scattered like diamond dust. Somewhere beneath them, Monarch stood his quiet watch. And somewhere else, a family had moved on, never knowing the loyalty they'd left behind. Then, Brian's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Who is this?" A woman's voice, tense, guarded. "Brian Walsh. I just left a message for Stephen Reynolds about Monarch." The woman gasped at the name, her voice breaking. "Is this some kind of cruel joke?" "No, ma'am," Brian said gently. "I promise you, it's not. Monarch. He escaped after we left. We were told he was never found, that he died." "He didn't," Brian said. "He's alive, Mrs. Reynolds. I found him." A long silence, then softly, "How do you know it's him?" Chestnut coat, a white star on his forehead, doesn't behave like a wild horse, and he watches the road every single day, like he's waiting for someone to come back. There was a muffled sob. "Oh my God." "I have a photo," Brian added. "Would you like me to send it?" "Yes," she whispered. Brian quickly sent the clearest image he had. Monarch. His eyes turned to the horizon, the sunset reflecting in them like fire. Seconds passed. Then came the unmistakable sound of someone breaking down. A raw sob filled the line. "It's him," she said. "Stephen, come here!" Brian heard shuffling, confused voices, and then a deeper one rising in disbelief. Moments later, a man took the phone. His voice was rough but shaken. "This is Stephen Reynolds. Are you absolutely certain this is our Monarch?" "I've verified everything I can without a DNA test," Brian said. "Locals say he showed up right after your family left. He's been standing in the same spot at Whispering Pines ever since. 10 years. 10 years? Stephen echoed hollow. "My God!" In the background, a younger female voice called out, "Dad, what's going on?" Stephen's voice turned muffled. "Ella, honey, it's about Monarch." Brian held his breath. Then, new voice on the line, young, breathless, urgent. "Hello? Is this about Monarch, the horse from the photo?" "Yes," Brian said. "Is this Ella?" "Yes, is he's alive? He's really still there?" "He is. He's been there all this time." "All this time," she repeated, voice cracking. "Waiting for us." There was silence, then soft sobs. Finally, her voice returned, steady, strong. We have to go get him." "Ella?" her mother started. "Michigan to Wyoming is more than 20 hours. We can't just—" "We have to," Ella said, unshakable now. "He waited 10 years for us, Mom, 10 years. A pause, then Stephen's voice. "She's right. Carolyn, we need to go." Brian cleared his throat, overwhelmed. "I'll be here. I can meet you at Whispering Pines. Just let me know when." "We'll leave tomorrow," Stephen said. "It'll take us 2 days at least." "I'll keep watch," Brian promised. "I won't let anything happen to him." When the call ended, Brian just stood there, still, heart full. In the space of minutes, everything had changed, from a fading legend to a living truth, from a decade of silence to the first step of a miracle. Would Monarch remember them? Would he let them near after a lifetime of distance? Would he go with them, after turning away from everyone else? At sunrise, Brian drove back to Whispering Pines, and there he was, Monarch, standing as he always had, coat glowing bronze in the early light. "They're coming," Brian whispered, eyes stinging. "They're finally coming back for you." And for the first time in 10 long years, Monarch's wait had a destination. For the first time, the lonely road that took everything from him might bring it all back. And word was already spreading through Golden Prairie. The horse that never gave up might finally be going home. By mid-afternoon, the heart of Golden Prairie, the small but spirited general store owned by Ruth Morgan, was alive with a hum of excitement. Word had spread quickly, and the townspeople gathered with wide eyes and eager whispers. For a decade, Monarch had stood watch by Whispering Pines Road, a quiet guardian cloaked in mystery. Now, at long last, the truth was coming into focus. The horse they had all watched, fed, and silently admired was not lost. He had been waiting, and now his family was finally on their way back. "I still can't believe it," Sheriff Wilson said, leaning his elbows against the worn countertop. "The Reynolds family, after all these years." Ruth nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Brian just confirmed it. They crossed into Nebraska this morning. They'll be here the day after tomorrow." Walter Donovan shook his head in disbelief. 10 years. We all thought he was just a stray, or maybe escaped from some transport. Turns out, he was waiting for that little girl, Ruth interrupted gently. "Her name's Ella. She was just 8 when they left. She'd be 18 now." The bell over the door jingled softly, and all conversation stopped as Brian walked in, camera bag slung over his shoulder. The room turned toward him in near unison. "Any news?" Sheriff Wilson asked quickly. Brian gave a small nod. "Just got off the phone with Stephen Reynolds. They're making good time. Should be pulling into Golden Prairie by tomorrow." "And Monarch?" Dr. Martinez asked from her usual spot by the window, eyes concerned. Brian sighed. "No change. He's still there, same spot, same posture, but I don't know. Something tells me he feels it, like maybe he knows." "Animals know more than we give them credit for," Dr. Martinez murmured. Then Walter voiced what had been hanging unspoken in everyone's thoughts. "If the reunion goes well, do you think they'll take him with them, back to Michigan?" A silence fell over the store like a blanket. Monarch wasn't just any horse anymore. He was part of the soul of Golden Prairie. "They haven't decided," Brian said carefully. "They're just focused on seeing him, making sure it's really him." "It's him," Ruth said firmly. "No ordinary animal waits in the same place for 10 years. That's not instinct, that's love." Later, Brian stepped outside with Dr. Martinez, the golden sun casting long shadows on the street. "There's something we need to talk about," she said quietly, concern lining her face. "Monarch has been on his own for a long time. Even if he recognizes them, he might not be the same horse they remember." Brian's brow furrowed. "You think he won't go with them?" "I think we have to be ready for that possibility," she said. "He's been independent for a decade, avoiding people. The shift back to domestic life, it could be traumatic. He may choose not to leave." "I'll talk to them," Brian said slowly. "They need to understand this may not go the way they hope." That evening, back at Whispering Pines Road, Brian returned to his quiet vigil. The sky blazed with orange and purple, casting Monarch in silhouette against the horizon. Brian set up his camera, capturing what might be the final photos of the horse's decade-long watch. Then, headlights. A truck pulled in behind him. Ray Running Horse, a respected horse whisperer known across the region, stepped out. "Miss Morgan told me," he said simply, "about the horse, about the family." "They're coming tomorrow," Brian replied. Ray nodded, then glanced toward Monarch's silhouette in the fading light. "May I sit with you a while?" "Of course." The two men sat in silence as stars appeared overhead. Finally, Ray spoke again. "In my people's traditions, animals are teachers. They show us how to live with truth. That horse, he's been teaching loyalty for 10 years. Every person who passed him learned something, even if they didn't realize it." Brian looked at Monarch, still standing, still waiting. "I never thought of it like that maybe his waiting had purpose." Ray smiled softly. "Everything has purpose, even waiting." He paused, then said, "And if he doesn't go with them, that's a choice we have to honor. Because maybe his teaching isn't done yet." The next morning stretched endlessly. Brian stayed by Monarch's side, photographing, observing, just being there. If everything went as planned, this would be Monarch's final day alone. Around noon, Walter Donovan arrived with his daughter Diane, carrying wooden posts and tools. "What's this?" Brian asked. Walter smiled. "We figured we'd set up a temporary corral. Not to trap him," he quickly added, "just to give them privacy, keep the area quiet, peaceful." By evening, a loose semicircle of rope and posts had formed near Monarch's usual spot beneath the oak tree. It didn't enclose him, it just defined a sacred space, one open side like an invitation. Just after nightfall, Brian received a text from Stephen Reynolds. "Made it to Cheyenne, should be there around noon tomorrow." Brian typed back, "Everything's ready, Monarch is still here, still waiting." The reply came seconds later. "After all this time, hard to believe, Ella hasn't slept since your call." Brian looked up at the stars, then back at Monarch, still motionless, still focused. Did he know? Was it possible? For the first time in 10 years, the answer seemed like it might be yes. For the first time, the waiting had an end in sight.